as our lovely host said, I'm Jackie, and I am here to talk about the vaginal speculum. Who here likes vaginas? Who here likes healthy vaginas? If you like healthy vaginas, bets are that you're also going to like the vaginal speculum. Featured as Best Supporting Actress in majority of gynecological exams, the vaginal speculum is inserted into a patient's vagina to open their vaginal walls so a physician can accurately inspect their genitals. Most patients would agree that these examinations are pretty awkward and go without any sexual connotation. But that wasn't the case in the 19th century when the vaginal speculum was reintroduced to modern medicine. The history of the speculum is pretty complicated, and it continues to have implications on the people behind the vaginas it beats today. Now, the vaginal speculum was actually used in ancient medicine, but was reintroduced to modern medicine by a French doctor in 1801. This doctor was trying to treat a patient with some weird, reoccurrent discharge, and he couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. So he constructed a thin metal tube to stick into her vagina to figure out what was wrong. Eventually, over time, that thin metal tube came to be what we now call the Graves speculum today. Now, in the 19th century, the vaginal speculum was not well received by the medical community, and there were multiple reasons for that. First of all, the vaginal speculum was mostly used by male doctors on female patients. Now, women in the 19th century, in case you didn't know, had a lot of societal expectations that they needed to live up to. In terms of their sexuality, they were meant to be modest and pure and chaste, and were essentially deemed asexual beings for a majority of that century. Doctors were really hesitant to use such an invasive tool on such a private part of their body to avoid violating those natural feelings of purity and modesty. Also, like many 8-year-old boys today, doctors in the 19th century thought vaginas were really gross. And they didn't want to touch them or look at them. Essentially, before the vaginal speculum came to be, when a patient would come in for a gynecological exam, it went a little bit like everyone's first experience with fingering. The doctor would upskirt his patient, fondle their vagina without making any eye contact, and look for something that felt kind of off. It was a little awkward. So when the vaginal speculum came to be, there were some doctors that were super stoked. It was like, yes, I don't have to finger bang my patients to diagnose them anymore. But other doctors really didn't like the idea of looking at a vagina in its eye. Essentially, this created two schools of thought, and these doctors got into some very heated arguments. They argued whether the speculum was even effective in the first place, which it was. They also argued whether the speculum could really harm or kill their patients, which it wasn't. A lot of these arguments had this underlying theme of morality. One doctor in particular, named Robert Carter, felt very strongly about the vaginal speculum. Robert Carter argued that women unintentionally gained sexual pleasure from a vaginal speculum exam. Robert furthered his argument by saying the speculum inspires evil, unchaste thoughts of masturbation. To personally respond to Carter's argument, I would like to let everyone know that this feels exactly how it looks like it's gonna feel. It's pretty awkward and cold and metallic. It does not turn you on, nor did it inspire me to masturbate after it was inside me. And eventually, doctors in the 19th century figured that out, and they realized that its diagnostic capabilities completely overwhelmed this possibility of moral degradation. And by the turn of the century, the vaginal speculum was widely used in the medical community. Now, although today we're a lot better at talking about sexual health problems than we were in the 19th century, There's still a stigma surrounding a lot of these issues. For example, some doctors still refrain from examining young unmarried patients with the vaginal speculum. If we continue to openly talk about our sexual issues and our health problems, we're going to reduce that stigma and allow the patients that really need this wonderful instrument and healthcare to get the care that they need. Thank you.